Any Trace Adkins fans here this morning? Couple? Okay, good. Trace Adkins sings these words in his song entitled, "Timing is Everything." When the stars line up and you catch a break, people think you're lucky, but you know it's grace. It can happen so fast or a little bit late. Timing is everything. You know, I've had close calls when it could have been me. I was young when I learned just how fragile life can be. I lost friends of mine. I guess it wasn't my time. Timing is everything. You can call it fate or destiny. Sometimes it really seems like a mystery. It can happen so fast or a little too late. Timing is everything. The famous baseball pitcher Warren Spahn once said about baseball, and I quote, "Hitting is timing. Pitching is upsetting the hitter's timing." The famous football coach Knute Rockne once said about football, and I quote, "The essence of football is blocking, tackling, and execution based on timing, rhythm, and deception." And the Olympic gold medalist Shawn Johnson said about her sport, and I quote, "Everything about gymnastics is your movements and precision and timing." Hesiod was a Greek scholar a poet who lived 700 years before the time of Christ, and he once observed, and I quote, "Right timing is in all things the most important factor." Timing is important in every aspect of life. Relationships often begin when two people happen to be in the same place at the same time. Many find work when they happen to apply at a business the exact time that business is looking for an employee, or they talk to someone who talks to someone else, etc. On the other hand, show up at work for a few minutes late several times in a row and you'll find yourself without a job because timing is everything. I once put a hard-boiled egg in a microwave at a motel too long. It exploded in the microwave at just a few seconds before I had set it to turn off because timing is everything. The Apostle Paul reminds us that God sent his Son into the world when the time was just right, because God knows timing is everything. And so in today's text, we learn that God protected his Son from being seized, arrested, prematurely assassinated because it wasn't God's appointed time. And the experience of Jesus should encourage you and I in knowing that God is watching over us. Nothing is going to happen to us without him first knowing about it, without him either allowing it or causing it to happen on his time schedule. The Jews had 3 annual feasts. All males were required to journey to Jerusalem to attend. The Festival of Shelters was held in September or October of each year. The Jews would build these temporary shelters, and they would live in them for 7 days during the festival as a reminder that their ancestors temporarily lived in shelters while they were wandering through the wilderness for 40 years. And so as we come to John 7, Jesus makes his way to Jerusalem for this festival, and he's teaching in the crowded temple area. His words are intriguing to some, but they are upsetting to others. And our text takes place here as the crowds of Jerusalem are talking about Jesus, and the Jewish religious leaders are looking for an opportunity to quietly take Jesus away and snuff him out. So John chapter 7, I'm going to begin reading from verse 25. Some of the people who lived in Jerusalem started to ask each other, "Isn't this the man they are trying to kill? But here he is, speaking in public, and they say nothing to him. Could our leaders possibly believe that he is the Messiah? But how could he be? For we know where this man comes from. When the Messiah comes, he will simply appear. No one will know where he comes from." While Jesus was teaching in the temple, he called out, "Yes, you know me, and you know where I come from. But I'm not here on my own. The one who sent me is true, and you don't know him. But I know him because I come from him, and he sent me to you." Then the leaders tried to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him because his time had not yet come. Many among the crowds at the temple believed in him. After all, they said, would you expect the Messiah to do more miraculous signs than this man has done? When the Pharisees heard that the crowds were whispering such things, they and the leading priests sent temple guards to arrest Jesus. Let's skip on down to verse 43. So the crowd was divided about him. Some even wanted him arrested, but no one laid a hand on him. So when the temple guards returned without having arrested Jesus, the leading priests and Pharisees demanded, why didn't you bring him in? We have never heard anyone speak like this, the guards responded. Have you been led astray too, the Pharisees mocked. Is there a single one of us rulers or Pharisees who believes in him? This foolish crowd follows him, but they are ignorant of the law. God's curse is on them. If you take out the outline there on the inside of your bulletin, we see, first of all, there is a time for everything. Many people in this crowd were favorable to Jesus and his teachings. The crowds assumed that even their religious leaders must have thought that Jesus was the Messiah. Otherwise, they would have silenced him a long time before that. Besides, the crowds concluded, if the Messiah hasn't come yet, when he does come, will he be able to perform any more miracles, any greater miracles than this man Jesus has already performed? That was one group of people. On the other hand, there were others who were saying, wait a minute. We know where this guy is from. We're familiar with his background. The Messiah, why, he's just going to walk into our midst as a total stranger. And since we know that this Jesus is from Nazareth, he couldn't possibly be the Messiah. Well, you know and I know, the truth is, Jesus didn't come from Nazareth, he came from heaven. He was sent to earth by God on assignment to earth. The wise King Solomon once wrote in Ecclesiastes 3 in verse 1, there is a time for everything. There is a season for every activity under heaven. The Message kind of reads like this, there's an opportune time to do things, a right time for everything on earth. In other words, life doesn't just happen. There's a purpose for everything that takes place. There is a reason for everything that takes place. And there is a time for everything to take place. And consequently, every one of us as human beings has two choices. We have to make a decision here. The first is to believe that life is a series of accidents. I was privileged to tour the Lennox plant a couple of years ago. Man, I was amazed, and I'm sure most manufacturing plants are like this, at the design and the engineering of the assembly line. I mean, there was nothing accidental. There was nothing coincidental about the way a furnace emerges from non-existence into an efficient heating machine. Everything was done in a preordained order. Every piece was formed and shaped and molded by machines that were designed and operated by human beings. And in order to produce the maximum number of heating units, every furnace was made with precision timing. Every employee had a specific responsibility in the making of that furnace. I've often felt the same way and noted the same precision and timing at Taco John's on Taco Tuesday. Have you ever noticed that? I mean, I kid you not, there can be 10 or 12 cars in the drive-thru. And you know how that building is. It scopes clear around and they come all the way to the street, it seems like sometimes. And at the same time, there's boatloads of people inside who are also ordering food at the same time. Someone has determined in their mind how every order is going to be taken and processed and delivered in the quickest amount of time possible. Every employee, and there are a lot of them there behind the counter, every employee has his or her assignment. If intelligent human beings are responsible for the invention and the design and the production and the efficient distribution of everything that we see and everything that we use, why would we be so stupid as to think this unbelievably complex universe just evolved over millions and millions of years through a series of millions upon millions of accidental occurrences? Oh, to be sure, the Bible says this was all a mess in the beginning. In fact, Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2 tell us the earth was formless and void. The Message tells it like this: the earth was a soup of nothingness, a bottomless emptiness, an inky blackness, a watery abyss. Can you picture that in your mind? I can't. And that's the point. In the beginning, there was no order. There was no organization. There was only muck, all right, for lack of a better word. But where did all of that muck come from? Well, evolutionists tell us it just happened. But it was from that muck, that goo, that plants and animals and human beings all eventually evolved. And we call ourselves intelligent people. The Bible has an entirely different explanation. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created that goo. In the beginning, the Spirit of God was hovering over all of that muck, and it was God who spoke and brought light and sea animals and land animals and flying animals and human beings into existence. Now, where did God come from? I honestly don't know. The Bible says that God has always existed. What I do know is this: it takes far less faith to believe that a God whom I can't explain is responsible for creating everything I can see than it does to believe that everything I can see just evolved into existence on its own. Would any of us be so intelligent as to accept that a furnace can evolve into existence on its own? Or that a taco can evolve from mud with no outside help? For that matter, I don't think it can evolve from mud with outside help, but nevertheless, you get my point. And yet godless people would have us further believe that once everything evolved into existence by itself with no outside help, life just happens. Life is nothing more than a series of accidents or coincidences. Well, there are many of us who choose to believe that life has a divine purpose. King David attributed the existence of all things to God. He said, "The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it. The world and all its people belong to Him, for He laid the earth's foundation on the seas." Speaking directly to God, David wrote, You made all the delicate inner parts of my body, and you knit me together in my mother's womb. You saw me before I was ever born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. God told the prophet Jeremiah, I knew you before you were, when I formed you in your mother's womb, before you were born. I had already set you apart and appointed you as my spokesman to the nation. God knows the plans that He has for each and every one of us. And if we honestly seek after Him, and He knows whether we are or not, God has promised we will find Him. We believe with Solomon, there is an opportune time to do things. There is a right time for everything that takes place on earth. It is an insult to God for us to think that anything just happens by chance. Look at verse 30 in our text. The leaders tried to arrest Jesus but no one laid a hand on him. Why? Because his time had not yet come. And in just a little bit later, we see that there were also many in the crowd who wanted to arrest Jesus. But verse 44 of John 7 tells us, no one so much as even touched him. Why? His time had not yet come. Check out John chapter 8 and verse 20. Jesus made these statements while he was teaching in the section of the temple known as the treasury. But he was not arrested. Why? Because his time had not yet come. Check out Luke chapter 4, verses 25 through 30. When Jesus dared to suggest that in the Old Testament, God had blessed a Gentile widow, and God had healed a Gentile army commander who had leprosy. Instead of caring to the needs of Jews, the Jewish people who heard Jesus say this, why, they were furious. How dare you suggest that God would favor Gentiles over Jews? You got a lot of nerve. Well, verses 29 and 30 tell us, jumping up, they mobbed him. They forced him to the edge of the hill on which the town was built. They intended to push him over the cliff, but he passed right through the crowd and went on his way. My question is this: if those people were so furious and so angry and they intended to push Jesus over the cliff, why didn't they do it? They outnumbered him. It's because Jesus' time to die had not yet come. And I'm telling you that what was true of Jesus is also true of you and I. Even though Satan is a roaring lion, seeking whom he can devour, we see in the life of Job that nothing happens. I mean, nothing happens in our lives without God's knowledge of it, without God's permission. Even though Satan wants to steal our joy and kill our hope and really destroy our lives and our relationships, God will walk through every storm. He walks through every fire with us. He demonstrates His strength in the midst of our weaknesses. He guides us through every trial, and as a result, God makes us more than conquerors. Now, not only is there a time for everything in life to happen, but the reality is timing is everything when it comes to what happens in our lives. For instance, what happens if the timing is off on your engine and the spark plugs aren't firing in the right order? I can tell you from personal experience, the car is not going to work properly, and you can ignore it all you want. It's not going to get any better unless something is done. What happens if your timing is off on your golf swing? I can tell you from personal experience, it is either going to hook to the left or slice to the right or just dribble on the ground in front of you. What happens if our timing is off when we're asking a girl on a date? Or our timing is off when we ask our parents for the keys to the car? Or our timing is off when we ask our boss for a raise? I can tell you from personal experience, you're going to crash and burn. Are we to believe that a beautiful Jewish girl named Esther just happened to win a beauty contest and become the queen of a pagan king? Or did God divinely place her in that position so that she could save her fellow Jews from the king's death squads? Are we to believe an intelligent Jewish boy named Joseph just happened to be sold by his brothers to Egyptian slave owners, just happened to be elevated there in Egypt to second in command only to Pharaoh? Or did God divinely place Joseph in that position so that he could help save the world from famine? Are we to believe that a teenage Jewish girl named Mary just happened to win a lottery and be selected as the mother of God's Son? Or did God divinely choose Mary and Joseph because God knew they would be the perfect parents to raise His Son? Some may ask, well, if God knows everything that takes place, if God either causes or God allows everything to take place, why does God allow evil to occur? Why doesn't God intervene when a child is being physically or verbally or even sexually abused? Why would God allow me to lose my job at this time? Why would God allow evil people to come into power? Why does it seem sometimes that wicked people flourish financially while godly people suffer in poverty? We've all heard those questions and more. If we're human, we've probably asked some of those questions ourselves. The answers lie in how we choose to look at life. Some people choose to believe that life is temporary. If we insist there is no God, everything just accidentally evolved into existence, then we have to also believe that once our bodies die, they simply return to dust, and that's that. End of the story. There's no life beyond this one. When we die, we're done. And during this brief time on earth, our primary purpose is to look out for me. Numero uno. And I assume that the rest of you think I am as important as I think I am, so we blog and we Twitter and we Facebook and we Instagram. We download everything that we're doing on YouTube so others know what's going on with me. And since there's no existence beyond this one, we ignore death. We don't talk about it. We push it off. We pretend it doesn't exist. And when we do have to finally face death and we mourn for a loved one, we'd have to do so without any hope beyond the grave. If life is truly and life is totally over when our body ceases to function, then the tragedies of life, they don't make any sense at all. And we can relate to the despair of Solomon, who wrote, "Everything is meaningless. What do people get for their hard work?" Honestly, very little. But there are many of us who choose to believe that life is eternal. You remember the reaction of Jesus when he was told that his very good friend Lazarus was sick and dying. Jesus, instead of immediately leaving to go see his friend Lazarus, remained where he was. He purposely stayed there until Lazarus had already died. And so when Jesus finally comes to see his friend Lazarus, one of Lazarus' sister, Martha, says, "Lord, if you had only come sooner, my brother would not have had to die. If you had come on our time schedule, Lazarus would still be alive." I mean, you get the feel there. What were you thinking of? But God's ways are always higher and greater than our ways. His thoughts are always higher than our thoughts. God's time schedule is always spot on. So while Jesus is standing there in front of Lazarus' tomb along with Martha, Jesus says, "Martha, listen, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" And with that, Jesus shouted out to that dead Lazarus. I mean, he had ceased breathing 4 days earlier. And Lazarus walks out of the tomb, and everyone discovered that God's timing is always the right timing. You see, because Jesus delayed coming to see Lazarus sooner, his sisters got to witness a resurrection from the dead and not just a physical healing. God's timing is always spot on. In Acts 12, chapter 12, King Herod had the apostle James arrested and beheaded. And when Herod saw how his action pleased the Jewish religious leaders, why, they thought that was cool. He got rid of James, one of those disciples, one of those Christians. When he saw how much they liked him for beheading James, he thought, wow, well, they'll love me if I can go after Peter. He's the ringleader of this whole movement. Acts chapter 12, verse 5 tells us that while Peter was in prison, the church prayed very earnestly for him. And the night before Peter was to go on trial, he is sleeping between a couple of Roman guards, and he is chained to those guards. And an angel of the Lord taps Peter on the shoulder, and he says, "Psst, get up. Come with me." And the chains fell off, and the soldiers didn't wake up. And the prison doors opened, and the gates out to the outside, they opened up. And when Peter went and presented himself to the body of believers who had been praying for him, they were flabbergasted. Peter's here. Can I ask you a question? Why is it when we pray for something that we're surprised when God answers it? Some might ask, why was Peter spared and James beheaded? Was Peter more righteous than James? Was nobody praying for James, just for Peter? Listen to me closely. When we walk by faith in God and in the promises that God has given to us of an eternity that we cannot yet see with our human eyes, instead of walking by sight in the temporary things we can only see with our human eyes, it changes our entire perspective on life. Were the prayers of those who prayed for James any less effective than the prayers of those who prayed for Peter? Not if we truly believe that when James died, he went into the presence of the Lord. Is that so bad? If we believe that life is eternal, then we know that our sufferings in this life, whatever they are, however severe they might be, are going to bring praise to God, while our exit from this life is going to result in our actually seeing God. And that's why the Apostle Paul would write in Philippians chapter 1, verses 20 and 21, "I will always be bold for Christ. I will live my life to honor Christ. If I live, it doesn't matter what comes my way." And I'm paraphrasing here. If I'm tortured while I'm in this life, it's okay, because in my suffering, I am going to honor Jesus Christ. If I'm blessed in the midst of that torture to die, it's okay, because I'm going to be home where I belong with Jesus. So whether I live or whether I die, my life belongs to Jesus, and it's okay. Nothing happens by accident. God has a plan in everything He does and in everything He allows Satan to do. Chuck Colson's prison fellowship ministry was serving in a prison in Salem, Oregon, several years ago. Kathy Tricoli sang the song, "My Life is in His Hands." And after the service, one of the male inmates came up to her and said, "I want to thank you for singing that song." He said, "My life is so dry," and the words really ministered to me. When she asked him why, what's going on in your life, he said, "I still have a lot of time to serve here in prison. And just when I didn't think it could get any worse, I received a letter from my wife this last week asking for a divorce." He said, "You helped me realize that my life is in God's hands and that somehow I'm going to be okay. Thank you for letting God speak to me through your song." Five days later, this same team, same people, was ministering in a prison 1,000 miles away in Chicago. Pretty much did the same service. Kathy Tricoli sang the same song, and afterwards a female inmate came up to her and said, "I want to thank you for singing that song. My soul has really been dry lately." And when Tricoli asked the lady to explain why, she said that her husband was also in prison many miles away, and she had recently written him a letter asking him for a divorce. But she said, "I'm not at peace with that decision. I just don't feel right about that decision." Now, the world would marvel at something like that. Man, what a coincidence. Is that unbelievable or what? Life just happens. But the Christ follower knows that God has perfect timing. There is no such thing as an accident or a coincidence in God's vocabulary. He has a reason for everything He does. And God used this prison ministry team to reconcile a broken marriage 1,000 miles apart. I'm telling you, it happens every day. You and I have divine appointments every day. And sometimes we don't even know it. God places someone in our path because He wants us to minister to them. He knows what we've been through, and He knows what they've been through, and He knows there's a connection to be made there. But so often, because we're not looking for it, it just goes right on past us, and we miss it. The Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians 5, verses 15 and 16, "Be careful how you live. Don't live as fools, but as those who are wise." And how do we do that? Paul says, "Make the most of every opportunity to do good." I don't have to tell you, our time on earth here is pretty short. It goes by so fast, and we spend so much of our time running here and there for those things that we think are urgent and those things we think are important. Instead of living for time, which passes so quickly, perhaps we should live for eternity. And the way we live for eternity is by giving our lives and our time to the one who does everything right, the one who does everything in His time, the one who knows all and sees all, the one who has promised never to leave us or forsake us, the one who has promised that He will make good everything that happens in our life.